I still remember the exact moment I realized my sister had become someone I no longer recognized. It was not during the months of wedding planning, not during the endless phone calls about flower arrangements and guest lists, and not even during those uncomfortable family dinners where she would carefully steer conversations away from our grandfather. No, the moment of clarity came when I watched her glide down the aisle of the Collins Grand Hotel in downtown Boston, wrapped in $75,000 worth of Italian silk and French lace, her face radiant with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The Collins Grand Hotel. Even the name should have been a clue, but Savannah had become so skilled at compartmentalizing her life that she had managed to ignore the obvious. Our grandfather, Bill Sterling, had built this architectural masterpiece from nothing more than ambition and an unshakable work ethic. The 20-story building stood as a beacon of modern luxury in the heart of Boston's financial district, its glass and steel facade reflecting the autumn sunlight like a monument to achievement. Inside, the grand ballroom where Savannah's wedding was taking place could have been mistaken for a European palace, with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers imported from Austria, and marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. I had arrived early that morning to help with last-minute preparations, though Savannah had made it clear my assistance was more of a courtesy than a necessity. She had hired an army of wedding planners, coordinators, and consultants to ensure every detail was perfect. And perfect it was, in that artificial manufactured way that money can buy but soul cannot create. Orchids from Hawaii cascaded from every available surface, their exotic blooms filling the air with a perfume so heavy it made my head ache. The tables were draped in ivory silk, each one centered with arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The jazz band setting up on the stage was legendary, the same ensemble that regularly performed at Blue Note in New York City. They had been flown in specifically for this occasion, along with their instruments and a list of technical requirements that had taken 3 pages to document. The menu, crafted by a Michelin-starred chef Savannah had somehow convinced to leave his restaurant in New York for the weekend, featured delicacies I could barely pronounce. Wagyu beef, imported truffles, champagne that cost more per bottle than a decent used car. Everything was designed to impress, to establish beyond any doubt that Savannah Sterling, or rather Savannah Montgomery, as she would soon be known, had arrived at the pinnacle of Boston society. I found myself standing near the entrance to the ballroom, watching the guests arrive in their designer gowns and tailored suits. The Montgomery family and their circle represented old money, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted, that traced its lineage back to the Mayflower and measured success not in dollars but in pedigree. Preston Montgomery IV, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, embodied this world perfectly. Tall, handsome in that carefully maintained way that spoke of personal trainers and dermatologists, with a smile that he deployed like a weapon at charity galas and country club dinners. His father, Preston Montgomery III, was a prominent figure in Boston's financial sector, the kind of man who sat on multiple boards and whose opinion could move markets. It was into this glittering assembly that our grandfather arrived. I spotted him immediately, though I am certain most of the guests did not even notice him at first. He was not wearing the worn work clothes I remembered from my childhood visits to his construction sites, nor was he dressed in the casual attire he favored for our Sunday dinners. Instead, he wore a simple but well-tailored business suit, nothing flashy or expensive by the standards of this crowd, just clean and respectable. He slipped into the ballroom through a side entrance, his weathered face taking in the spectacle with an expression I could not quite read. He made his way to the back row of seats, choosing a spot in the corner that was partially obscured by one of those massive floral arrangements. My heart lurched. I had been the one to personally deliver his invitation, printed on heavy cardstock with gold embossing that probably cost more than the paper was worth. Savannah had been reluctant to send it at all, I knew. I had overheard her on the phone with Preston's mother, laughing nervously as she explained that, yes, she did have family, just not the kind of family that fit easily into their social circle. A self-made businessman, she had said, trying to make it sound respectable while simultaneously diminishing everything Grandpa Bill had accomplished. Not from our world, she had added, and I had wanted to scream, but he had come anyway. Despite knowing he was not truly wanted, despite Savannah's careful avoidance of any substantive conversation about him for the past year, despite the fact that she had not visited him once since getting engaged to Preston, he had come because he loved her, because she was his granddaughter, because some part of him still believed in the importance of family even when that family had made it abundantly clear they were ashamed of where they came from. The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance money could orchestrate. Savannah looked stunning as she made her entrance, and I will admit that despite everything, I felt a complicated mixture of pride and sadness. This was my sister, the girl I had grown up with, who had once helped me build blanket forts and taught me how to braid my hair. Somewhere along the way, she had decided that our past was something to be erased rather than honored. The moment came just as the officiant was welcoming everyone to witness this joyous union. Savannah was gliding down the aisle on the arm of a family friend, since our father had passed away when we were young. Her eyes swept across the assembled guests, soaking in their admiration, their approval, and then her gaze landed on Grandpa Bill in his corner. I saw it happen. I was standing with the bridesmaids, close enough to see every micro-expression that crossed her face. There was recognition, of course, a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe fear. And then, as if she had flipped a switch, her face smoothed into that practiced smile, and she did something that made my blood run cold. She stopped walking for just a moment, turning slightly toward where Grandpa Saturday. In a voice that carried clearly through the suddenly quiet room, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear but calculated to sound spontaneous and gracious, she said, "Oh, sir, you must be mistaken. I think you might be in the wrong venue." "Sir," not Grandpa, not even acknowledgement of recognition, just "sir," as if he were a confused stranger who had wandered into the wrong event. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, felt the sharp sting of tears that I absolutely refused to let fall. I glanced at Grandpa Bill, and what I saw on his face broke something inside me. He did not look surprised. There was sadness there, yes, and disappointment, but not surprise, as if some part of him had expected exactly this. A few guests laughed uncomfortably. Preston's aunt, a woman dripping with diamonds and condescension, whispered something to her companion. The moment passed, Savannah continued her processional, and the ceremony went on as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. In those few seconds, my sister had made her choice, had drawn a line in the marble floor of that ballroom, and declared which side she stood on. The ceremony itself was mercifully brief, a carefully curated blend of traditional elements and personal touches that had no doubt been focus grouped and approved by Preston's family. I barely heard the words. I was too focused on trying to catch Grandpa's eye, to somehow communicate my horror and my solidarity, but he kept his gaze fixed forward, his expression neutral. The transition to the reception felt like descending into a particularly elegant circle of hell. The ballroom had been transformed, the chairs rearranged around tables set with china so delicate it looked like it might shatter if you breathed on it too hard. The lighting shifted to something softer, more romantic, and the jazz band launched into a sophisticated rendition of a Cole Porter standard. And there, in the corner near the kitchen entrance, at a table that could charitably be described as an afterthought, sat my grandfather. The placement was deliberate, cruelly so. While the Montgomery family and their inner circle occupied the prime tables near the dance floor, while Savannah and Preston held court at the head table on an elevated platform like royalty addressing their subjects, Grandpa Bill had been assigned a small table that looked like it had been added at the last minute. The name card in front of his place setting was printed in a font so small I could barely read it from across the room. He was positioned near the swinging doors that led to the kitchen, where servers rushed back and forth with trays of canapés and champagne flutes. It was as if Savannah had wanted him present just enough to say she had not excluded family entirely, but tucked away where he could be conveniently forgotten. I watched him sit there alone as the cocktail hour progressed, as groups of elegantly dressed guests clustered and laughed and air-kissed each other. No one approached him. No one even seemed to notice him. He might as well have been invisible. I was standing near the bar, trying to decide whether to go to him or respect his apparent desire to remain unobtrusive, when Preston's aunt made her appearance. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, the kind who had clearly once been beautiful and was now attempting to preserve that beauty through a combination of expensive procedures and aggressive jewelry. She wore a gown covered in sequins that caught every light in the room, and diamonds that looked like they belonged in a museum. Her voice, unfortunately, had not been refined along with her appearance. It carried across the room like a foghorn as she approached Savannah and Preston, who were greeting guests near the head table. "Savannah, darling, I must ask, is that man over there?" She gestured vaguely in Grandpa's direction without actually looking at him. "Is he with the valet service? He keeps staring at everything. It is rather unprofessional." The valet service. As if my grandfather, who had built one of the most successful property development companies in New England, who had created jobs for thousands of people, who had transformed entire neighborhoods, was some kind of servant who had wandered away from his post. I started moving before I even realized what I was doing, ready to march over there and correct this horrible woman in terms that would probably get me thrown out of the reception. But Savannah got there first. She laughed. Actually laughed, this high, artificial sound that I had never heard from her before. "Oh, please do not worry about it," she said, her voice carrying that same false brightness. "I am sure it is just a misunderstanding." She did not correct the assumption. She did not defend him. She did not even acknowledge his existence beyond dismissing the concern. She just laughed and changed the subject, complimenting Preston's aunt on her necklace, and the moment passed as if it had never happened. Except it had happened. And I had witnessed it. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that Grandpa Bill had heard every word. The dinner service began with all the precision of a military operation. White-gloved servers emerged from the kitchen bearing plates of food that looked more like art installations than meals. The Michelin-starred chef had outdone himself, creating courses that were photographed by guests on their phones before being delicately consumed. Wine flowed freely, the bottles chosen by a sommelier who had provided detailed tasting notes that were printed on small cards at each place setting. Through it all, my grandfather sat alone at his corner table, eating quietly. A server did bring him food, the same elaborate courses everyone else received, but there was something perfunctory about the service, as if they were checking off a box rather than attending to a valued guest. I was seated at the bridal party table, close enough to Savannah to see the flush of triumph on her face as toast after toast praised her beauty, her grace, her perfect match with Preston. His father, Preston Montgomery III, stood to deliver what he clearly considered the speech of the evening. He was a silver-haired man with the kind of commanding presence that came from generations of privilege and power. His voice boomed across the ballroom as he regaled the guests with stories of the Montgomery family history, their contributions to Boston society, their legacy of philanthropy and leadership. Then he turned his attention to Savannah. "My dear daughter-in-law," he began, and I noticed how Savannah glowed at the designation. "Comes from humble beginnings. But she has proven, beyond any doubt, that class cannot be purchased. It must be inherited, or—" He paused for effect, his smile sharpening. "It must be married into." The room erupted in laughter and applause. People clinked their glasses. Preston's mother wiped away a theatrical tear. And Savannah, my sister, the girl who used to help Grandpa plant tomatoes in his backyard garden, who had sat on his lap while he taught her to read blueprints, who had benefited from his generosity in ways large and small throughout her entire life, smiled and nodded as if this veiled insult to her origins was the highest compliment she could receive. I felt sick. I looked toward Grandpa's table and found his seat empty. My heart sank. He had left. He had finally had enough and left, and I could not blame him. The humiliation, the disrespect, the casual cruelty of it all had finally driven him away. But then I saw him. He had not left. He had stood up. And he was walking, slowly and deliberately, toward the stage where Preston's father still stood basking in the glow of his own eloquence. The room seemed to sense something was happening before it actually did. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The jazz band, which had been providing soft background music, trailed off uncertainly. By the time Grandpa Bill reached the steps leading up to the small stage, you could have heard a pin drop in that massive ballroom. Preston's father noticed him finally, his expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. "Excuse me, sir, but this is a private family event." Grandpa Bill's smile was cold, controlled. "Then I suppose we should discuss a private family matter in front of everyone." He climbed the steps with the confidence of a man who had addressed boardrooms full of hostile investors, who had negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, who had built something substantial from nothing. He was not intimidated by the setting or the audience. If anything, he seemed energized by it. Someone tried to hand him a microphone, but he waved it away. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the ballroom with perfect clarity anyway. Years of shouting instructions across construction sites had given him projection that no sound system could match. "You have had a beautiful wedding, Savannah," he said, looking directly at my sister. Her face had gone pale, and Preston had half risen from his seat, looking between his father and my grandfather with growing alarm. "Worth every penny." And there were a lot of pennies, were there not? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather portfolio, the kind businessmen carry to important meetings. He opened it, and I could see even from my table that it was full of documents. "Before we continue celebrating this union and all the class and refinement it represents, I think it is time we acknowledged where that refinement actually came from." Preston's father tried to interrupt. "Now see here, this is highly inappropriate." Grandpa Bill did not even glance at him. He was reading from the documents now, his voice steady and factual. "This venue, the Collins Grand Hotel, the jazz ensemble from Blue Note in New York City, the Michelin-starred chef and his staff of 20, the flowers, imported from Hawaii at considerable expense, the wine collection, carefully curated, and that dress." He looked at Savannah. "That $75,000 masterpiece of French couture. Every single element of this celebration was funded by Collins Global Properties." He paused, letting that sink in. "My company." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive, like the air before a thunderstorm. I could see Preston's father processing this information, could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. "You are joking," he finally said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I never joke about legacy or gratitude," Grandpa Bill replied. He held up the portfolio. Every contract, every invoice, every receipt, all of it traced back to Collins Global Properties or its various subsidiaries and charitable foundations. The total comes to just over $1 billion when you factor in the valuation of this venue itself, which, as some of you may not know, I still own. A murmur ran through the crowd. Guests were pulling out their phones, presumably to verify this information. The Montgomery family looked like they had been struck by lightning. Grandpa Bill's eyes found Savannah again, and for the first time since he had taken the stage, I saw real emotion break through his controlled exterior. It was disappointment, deep and profound, mixed with a kind of weary sadness. You could pretend not to know your family, Savannah. That was your choice. But tonight, the world will remember exactly where you came from. The room erupted, not in applause, but in chaos. People were standing, talking over each other, demanding explanations. Preston was yelling something at Savannah, who had started crying, her carefully applied makeup running down her face in dark streaks. Preston's father was red-faced, sputtering about contracts and legal obligations. And Grandpa Bill just stood there, calm in the eye of the storm he had created, and delivered the line that would end up in every news report for the next week. The Collins Foundation has sponsored every vendor here tonight, and as of right now, his voice rose, cutting through the noise like a blade. That sponsorship has been withdrawn. The effect was immediate and devastating. The lights in the ballroom flickered once, twice, then dimmed to emergency lighting levels. The jazz band stopped playing mid-note, their instruments falling silent as their manager rushed over to speak with them urgently. Servers who had been circulating with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres froze in place, then began rapidly clearing tables and disappearing into the kitchen. The hotel manager materialized, looking like he might faint. He rushed to Preston's father, his voice low but audible in the shocked silence. "Sir, all our contracts specify Collins Foundation authorization. Without Mr. Sterling's signature, we cannot continue service. Hotel policy requires us to cease all operations immediately." "You cannot do this." Preston's father was shouting now, his composure completely shattered. "This is a private event, we have rights." Grandpa Bill turned to him, and his smile was terrible to behold. "You have exactly the rights that your contracts specify. And those contracts, which I invite you to review at your leisure, make very clear who holds the power here. I can do this, Mr. Montgomery, because I own this event, this venue, and, as it happens, a controlling interest in the firm that manages your family's investment portfolio." The last part was delivered almost casually, but its effect was like a bomb going off. Preston's father actually staggered backward, gripping the edge of a table for support. The guests were fleeing now, a mass exodus of designer gowns and expensive suits, everyone eager to distance themselves from what was clearly becoming a disaster. I could hear them on their phones as they headed for the exits, already spreading the news. This would be the talk of Boston society for months, possibly years. Through it all, I stayed frozen in my seat, watching my grandfather orchestrate this perfect, terrible revenge. And I will admit, there was a dark satisfaction in seeing the Montgomery family brought low, in watching Savannah's carefully constructed fantasy crumble around her. She was on her feet now, stumbling toward the stage in her $75,000 dress, tears streaming down her face. "Grandpa, please, I did not know. I did not understand." He looked down at her, and for a moment, I thought he might relent. But his voice, when he spoke, was implacable. "Oh, Savannah, you knew enough to be ashamed of me. That is all you needed to know." Preston was beside her now, his face twisted with fury. "You told me your grandfather was just a retired contractor. You said your family had nothing. You lied to me." The irony was not lost on me. He was angry about being deceived about money, about status, but had no concern for the man who had been humiliated and dismissed all evening. It told me everything I needed to know about Preston Montgomery IV, and exactly what kind of marriage my sister had been heading toward. Grandpa Bill began to descend from the stage. Preston's father tried one last time to assert authority, moving to block his path. "You will regret this. The Montgomery family has connections. We will destroy you." My grandfather stopped, looked at him with something approaching pity. "Mr. Montgomery, I just dismantled your daughter-in-law's wedding with a phone call. Your connections answer to people who answer to people who answer to me. If I restructure certain investment portfolios tomorrow, your family will feel it for generations. Are we clear?" Preston's father stepped aside. As Grandpa Bill walked toward the exit, the few remaining guests parted before him like the Red Sea. I grabbed my clutch and hurried after him, ignoring Savannah's desperate calls of my name. At the doorway, he paused and turned back one final time. He raised his water glass, which he had somehow managed to bring with him from his abandoned table. "To honesty," he announced to the chaotic ballroom. "It was not served here tonight, but I hope all of you find it someday." Then he walked out, and I followed, leaving behind the wreckage of what was supposed to be the social event of the season. The aftermath was everything you might expect from a scandal of this magnitude. By the next morning, the story had made every local news outlet. The Boston Globe ran it on the front page. "Billionaire cancels granddaughter's wedding mid-ceremony." WBZ-TV led their evening broadcast with it for 3 consecutive nights. Social media exploded with takes and opinions and, inevitably, memes. The Montgomery family tried damage control, but you cannot control damage of this scale. Their reputation, built on generations of carefully maintained appearances, had been revealed as hollow. The charitable foundation they had promoted for years as evidence of their civic commitment turned out to be minimally funded, more public relations than actual philanthropy. Business associates began quietly distancing themselves. Country club memberships were quietly not renewed. Preston's father's firm lost several major clients within the week, apparently after Grandpa Bill made some subtle suggestions in the right boardrooms. The family's stock portfolio, which he had not been bluffing about influencing, took a significant hit. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be traced directly back to my grandfather, just the natural consequences of suddenly losing favor with people who mattered in Boston's financial circles. As for Savannah, the consequences were perhaps most severe. Preston called off the marriage within 48 hours, citing irreconcilable differences and what his lawyer delicately termed material misrepresentations about family background and financial circumstances. The Montgomery family wanted nothing to do with her. Her friends, most of whom had been drawn from Preston's social circle, vanished overnight. The invitations to gallery openings and charity galas stopped coming. She had bet everything on a life that disappeared the moment it became inconvenient. She reached out to me a week later, asking to meet. I almost said no. Part of me wanted to let her sit with the consequences of her choices, to feel the full weight of what she had done to Grandpa Bill. But another part of me remembered that she was still my sister, and maybe, just maybe, this catastrophe was exactly the wake-up call she needed. We met at a small coffee shop in the South End, far from the upscale restaurants and hotel lounges where Savannah had grown accustomed to being seen. She arrived looking diminished somehow, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Without the armor of designer clothes and professional styling, she looked younger, more like the sister I remembered from before Preston Montgomery entered her life. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice small. We ordered coffee and sat at a table in the back, away from the other patrons. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "I need to apologize. To you, to Grandpa, to everyone." "Do you even understand what you are apologizing for?" I asked. I had not meant for the words to come out so harsh, but I could not help it. "Do you get what you did? What that night must have felt like for him?" She started crying then, quietly, tears dripping onto the worn wooden table. "I was ashamed," she whispered, "of where we came from, of not having the right pedigree, the right connections. Preston's family, they made it so clear that I was beneath them, that I only belonged because I was pretty and charming and willing to pretend to be something I was not. And I thought if I just committed to the illusion completely, if I erased everything that did not fit their picture of who I should be, then eventually it would become real." "So you erased Grandpa." "It was not a question. I convinced myself he would understand. That he would want me to be happy, to have this life." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I was so stupid, so unforgivably stupid. I thought about all the things I could say, all the angry recriminations I had been storing up, but sitting across from my broken, humiliated sister, I found I did not have the energy for it. "Grandpa gave you everything, not just money, though God knows there was plenty of that. He gave you love, support, pride in your accomplishments. He bragged about you to anyone who would listen. And you repaid him by pretending he did not exist." "I know," she sobbed. "I know. Is there any way he could forgive me?" I gathered my things, preparing to leave. "He does not need to forgive you, Savannah. He already proved his worth, his power, his place in the world. You are the one who needs to figure out who you are without the borrowed prestige of the Montgomery name. You need to find your way back to the values Grandpa tried to teach us." She grabbed my hand desperately. "Will you talk to him? Will you ask him if he will see me?" I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. "No, if you want his forgiveness, you will have to earn it. And that starts with figuring out how to forgive yourself for becoming someone who could treat family that way." I left her there in that coffee shop, and I will not pretend it did not hurt. But some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and Savannah had a lot of learning ahead of her. That evening, I went to visit Grandpa Bill. He was at his penthouse in the Collins Grand Hotel, the same building where Savannah's wedding had imploded so spectacularly. The space was beautiful but understated, decorated with photos of construction projects and family gatherings rather than expensive art. It felt like him, solid and real and unpretentious. We sat on the balcony overlooking Boston as the sun set, turning the Charles River gold and painting the city in shades of amber and rose. He poured us both glasses of sparkling water, his preferred drink. We did not talk about Savannah or the wedding or any of it for a while. We just sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights begin to glow as darkness fell. "Finally," he said, "I did not want to hurt her, you know. I just needed her to understand that you cannot build a life on shame and lies." "She understands now," I said. "Whether she can do anything with that understanding remains to be seen." He nodded slowly. "Some people spend their whole lives chasing after acceptance from the wrong people. I built my empire so my family would never have to do that. So you could hold your heads high, know your worth, never feel less than anyone. Somewhere along the way, Savannah forgot that lesson. Maybe she will remember it now, I offered. Maybe this was what she needed. Maybe, he agreed. He raised his glass. To family, the real kind, the kind that shows up even when it is hard, the kind that refuses to be ashamed of where they came from. I clinked my glass against his. To family. We sat there as the city lights blazed around us, grandfather and granddaughter, survivors of a battle that should never have had to be fought. Below us, the Collins Grand Hotel hummed with activity, a monument to what one man could build through determination and integrity. And somewhere in the city, Savannah was learning what it cost to forget where you came from. Some people build empires with money alone. My grandfather built his with honor, with sweat, with a refusal to compromise his values even when doing so would have been easier. And that night, standing on that stage in front of Boston's elite, he had shown everyone watching that when honor is trampled, even the most glittering empire can crumble in an instant. The story spread far beyond Boston in the weeks that followed. Business journals wrote think pieces about family dynamics and wealth. Social media influencers debated whether Grandpa Bill had gone too far or not far enough. The Montgomery family largely disappeared from public view, their humiliation too profound to overcome quickly. As for Savannah, I heard she eventually moved to the West Coast, trying to start over somewhere far from the wreckage of her Boston dreams. I have not spoken to her in months. Grandpa sends her money sometimes, anonymously, through lawyers and trusts. He may be angry, but he is not cruel. He wants her to succeed, but on her own terms, not on borrowed prestige or manufactured pedigree. I think about that night often, about the precise moment when the lights went out and Savannah's carefully constructed fantasy died with them. I think about the expression on Grandpa's face as he walked out of that ballroom, not victorious exactly, but satisfied that he had made his point in a way that could never be ignored or dismissed. But mostly I think about the lesson that night taught me, a lesson I carry with me every day. You can have all the money in the world, all the connections, all the right names and addresses and club memberships. But if you build your life on a foundation of shame, if you buy into the lie that where you come from matters less than where you are going, if you treat the people who loved you first as obstacles to overcome rather than blessings to cherish, then you have already lost the only game that really matters. Grandpa Bill did not ruin Savannah's wedding out of spite or revenge, though it certainly looked that way to the guests scrambling for the exits that night. He did it because sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of integrity is to show them the cost of abandoning it. Money can buy you a beautiful dress and a magnificent venue and the attendance of people who matter. But respect, real respect, the kind that survives embarrassment and hardship and the test of time, that can only be earned. And it can be lost in a single moment, with a single denial, with two small words that cut deeper than any knife. "Oh, sir, you must be mistaken." Those words cost Savannah everything that mattered. I only hope that someday, when she has done the work of rebuilding herself, when she has learned to value substance over appearance and loyalty over status, she will understand why those words needed to be answered the way they were. Until then, I will sit on this balcony with my grandfather, looking out over the city he helped build, grateful that I learned early the difference between gilded facades and solid foundations. Some of us are fortunate enough to learn that lesson from watching others fail. Others have to learn it by becoming the cautionary tale. Savannah got her grand wedding after all, complete with flowers and champagne and all the trappings of society success. It just ended with the lights going out and the truth finally being told. And in its way, that was the most valuable gift Grandpa Bill could have given her, though I suspect it will be years before she understands that. Respect cannot be bought, legacy cannot be faked. And family, real family, the kind built on love and sacrifice and shared history, that is worth more than all the Montgomery connections in Boston. My grandfather proved that with a single phone call and the courage to walk away from people who should have been honored by his presence. The Collins Grand Hotel still stands in downtown Boston, a testament to what one man built, but the real monument is not made of glass and steel. It is made of integrity, of a willingness to stand up and be counted even when doing so means burning down everything that has been carefully constructed on lies. Some lessons can only be learned in fire. Savannah learned hers in the darkness of a ballroom where the lights went out and the pretense finally ended. Whether she will emerge from those ashes remade and renewed, only time will tell. But I know this: Grandpa Bill gave her the truth, even when the truth hurt. And that, more than any monetary gift, more than any social connection or business opportunity, that was the greatest act of love he could offer. Because sometimes, destroying what is false is the only way to make room for what is real. And Savannah needed real, even if she did not know it yet. Even if learning that lesson cost her everything she thought she wanted. The truth has a price, but lies cost more in the end. Always. 3 months after the wedding that never was, I found myself back at the Collins Grand Hotel for a very different kind of event. Grandpa Bill was hosting a charity gala for a scholarship fund he had established years ago, one that helped first-generation college students from working-class families. The ballroom looked different now, dressed in simpler decorations that somehow felt more elegant than all of Savannah's imported orchids. There were no pretenses here, no performances. Just people who had earned their places through merit and hard work, celebrating the opportunities that education could provide. I was helping coordinate the event, working with the same staff who had been forced to shut down Savannah's reception mid-service. They treated Grandpa Bill with genuine respect and affection, not the servile deference that Preston's family had expected as their due. These were people who knew his story, who had seen him build something meaningful from nothing, who understood that true class had nothing to do with bloodlines or trust funds. As I was reviewing the seating arrangements with the event manager, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not immediately recognize, but the message made my stomach clench. It was from Savannah. "I'm downstairs. I know I don't have the right to ask, but I need 5 minutes. Please." I showed the message to Grandpa Bill. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the words on the screen. Then he nodded once, sharply. "Tell her to meet us in the rooftop garden. 20 minutes. The rooftop garden was one of Grandpa's favorite additions to the hotel, a green space he had insisted on including despite the architect's protests about the engineering challenges and expense. He had wanted a place where people could escape the concrete and glass, where they could remember that growth required roots and patience and care. It seemed fitting somehow that this meeting would happen there. Savannah arrived exactly on time, which surprised me. The woman who climbed the stairs to the rooftop was almost unrecognizable from the bride I had seen 3 months ago. She wore no makeup, her hair was pulled back simply, and her clothes were ordinary, the kind you might buy at a department store rather than a boutique. But it was her eyes that struck me most. They looked older, worn, but also clearer somehow, as if a fog had lifted. She stopped several feet away from where Grandpa Bill and I stood, as if afraid to come closer without permission. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The sounds of the city drifted up from below, car horns and sirens and the general hum of urban life, but up here it all felt distant, muted. "Thank you for seeing me," Savannah finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure you would." Grandpa Bill studied her with those sharp eyes that had evaluated countless business deals and measured the character of men who thought they could deceive him. "You said you needed 5 minutes. The clock is running." She flinched at the coldness in his tone, but she did not look away. "I've spent the last 3 months trying to figure out what to say to you. How to apologize for something that can't really be apologized for. I've written 100 letters I never sent, practiced speeches that all sounded hollow. Because the truth is, there are no words that can undo what I did to you." "Then why are you here?" His voice was not cruel, just direct, demanding honesty. "Because I need you to know that I understand now, what I threw away, what I was so desperate to escape." She took a shaky breath. "I've been seeing a therapist, Dr. Chen, over in Cambridge. She specializes in family dynamics and identity issues. We've been unpacking why I felt such deep shame about my background, about you, about everything that made me who I am." This surprised me. Savannah had always dismissed therapy as something for people who could not handle their problems on their own. Hearing her talk about it openly was jarring. "And what did you discover?" Grandpa Bill asked. There was something in his tone now, not quite softness, but a willingness to listen. Savannah walked closer, slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal. "I discovered that I spent my whole life feeling like I had to prove something. When Dad died and we didn't have much money, when the other kids at school came from families with vacation homes and trust funds, I felt less than, inferior. And instead of recognizing that those feelings came from inside me, from my own insecurity, I blamed my circumstances. I blamed our family. I blamed you." She stopped, tears starting to stream down her face. "You were never the problem. You were never anything but proud and successful and generous. But I couldn't see that because I was looking at you through the eyes of people whose opinions shouldn't have mattered. The Preston Montgomerys of the world, who measure worth by how many generations back your money goes, who think pedigree matters more than character." Grandpa Bill's expression had not changed, but I saw his hand grip the railing of the garden wall a little tighter. "Go on. I can't undo what I did at that wedding. I can't take back calling you sir like you were a stranger. I can't erase the fact that I put you in a corner, that I let Preston's family mock you, that I chose social status over family loyalty. But I can tell you that every day since then, I have woken up knowing I made the worst mistake of my life. And I can promise you that I will spend however long it takes becoming someone worthy of being your granddaughter again." The silence that followed felt heavy with years of accumulated hurt and disappointment. I found myself holding my breath, waiting to see what Grandpa Bill would do. Would he forgive her? Could he? Finally, he spoke, and his voice was rough with emotion he had been holding back. "Do you know why I funded that wedding, Savannah? Why I paid for every single detail of that extravagant show?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "Because, despite everything, despite the distance you had put between us, despite knowing that you were ashamed of me, I still loved you. I still wanted you to have the wedding of your dreams. I told myself that maybe if I gave you this gift, if I made your day perfect, you would remember that family matters, that blood matters. That the people who love you when you have nothing are worth more than the people who only love you when you fit their image. His voice broke slightly on the last words, and I saw Savannah crumble, sinking to her knees on the rooftop tiles. But then you looked at me in that ballroom, in front of all those people, and you denied knowing me. And I realized that all the money in the world couldn't buy what I really wanted, which was for you to be proud of where you came from, proud of what we built together as a family. I am proud, Savannah sobbed. I am so proud, and I was too blind and stupid to see it. You built an empire, Grandpa. You created something meaningful and lasting. And I traded that legacy for the approval of people who turned their backs on me the moment things got difficult. Grandpa Bill walked over to her slowly. He reached down and, with surprising gentleness, helped her to her feet. The question is not whether I can forgive you, Savannah. I forgave you the moment I walked out of that ballroom. Anger is exhausting, and I'm too old to carry it around. Hope flickered in her eyes, desperate and fragile. But forgiveness is not the same as trust, he continued, his tone firm. Trust has to be rebuilt, brick by brick, the same way I built this hotel. It takes time, it takes consistency, it takes proving through actions, not words, that you've changed. I'll do whatever it takes, Savannah said urgently. I'll work for it, I'll earn it. Just please, please give me the chance. He looked at her for a long moment, and I saw the war playing out in his expression. The hurt grandfather battling with the man who had spent his life believing in second chances, who had built his fortune on the premise that people could rise above their circumstances if given opportunity and support. I'm going to tell you what my father told me when I was your age and made a mistake that almost cost me everything, he said finally. He said, "Boy, I can't walk your path for you. I can't make your choices or live with your consequences, but if you're willing to do the work, really do the work of becoming better, then I'll be here to watch you try." Savannah's face crumpled with relief and renewed tears. So here's what's going to happen. Grandpa Bill continued, you want to be part of this family again? You start by understanding what this family is about. Not the money, not the business, but the values. Hard work, integrity, loyalty, humility. Yes, she whispered. Starting Monday, you're going to report to the Collins Foundation office. You're going to work as an administrative assistant. Minimum wage, no special treatment, no family privileges. You're going to file paperwork, answer phones, schedule appointments, and learn the business from the ground up, the same way I did. I watched Savannah process this. This was the woman who had been planning to marry into one of Boston's most prominent families, who had expected a life of charity galas and country club luncheons. Now she was being offered an entry-level position making barely above minimum wage. I'll be there, she said without hesitation. Monday morning. I'll be there. And you're going to continue therapy, every week. No exceptions. Dr. Chen will send me monthly reports on your progress, with your permission. You have my permission. And most importantly, his voice softened just slightly, you're going to have Sunday dinner with me and Chloe, every week, no matter what, because that's what families do. They show up, they sit together, they break bread and remember why they matter to each other. Savannah was crying openly now, but there was something different about these tears. They were not tears of shame or desperation, but of genuine relief and gratitude. Thank you, she managed. Thank you for not giving up on me. I've never given up on you, Savannah. I just needed you to hit bottom so you could find your way back up. He pulled her into a hug then, the first physical contact between them in over a year. She clung to him like a drowning person clutching a lifeline. I stood there watching, my own tears threatening to spill over. This was not the triumphant reconciliation of a movie, all swelling music and perfectly delivered lines. This was messy and complicated and conditional, but it was real. It was honest. And maybe that was more valuable than any fairy tale ending. When they finally pulled apart, Grandpa Bill turned to me. Chloe, you'll help your sister get set up at the foundation office? Show her the ropes? Of course, I said, meeting Savannah's eyes. There was still hurt between us, still wounds that would take time to heal. But I saw something in her expression that had been missing for years. Humility, genuine remorse, and a willingness to do the work of change rather than just talk about it. Thank you, Savannah said to me, for not turning your back on me, for asking Grandpa to see me. I didn't ask him, I said honestly. He made that choice himself. That's who he is, the kind of man who believes in second chances, even when they're not deserved. She nodded, accepting the subtle rebuke. I know I have a long way to go. With both of you, I know Sunday dinners and an office job don't erase what I did. No, they don't, Grandpa Bill said bluntly, but they're a start. And sometimes a start is all you need to find your way home. We stood there for a while longer, the three of us, in that rooftop garden high above the city. Below us, the charity gala was in full swing, celebrating young people who were working to build better futures for themselves. Above us, the sky was beginning to darken, stars starting to emerge despite the city lights. "I should let you get back to your event," Savannah said eventually. "I know you have responsibilities." "Monday," Grandpa Bill reminded her. "8 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." "I won't be," she promised. Then she turned to leave, pausing at the stairway. "Grandpa? When I build something worth being proud of, when I finally become someone who deserves the sterling name, I'm going to make sure the whole world knows exactly where I came from. And I'm going to make sure they know it's the greatest privilege of my life." He nodded slowly. "I'll be watching." After she left, Grandpa Bill and I stood in silence for a moment. "Do you think she means it?" I asked. "Do you think she's really changed?" "I think she's in the process of changing," he said carefully. "Whether she completes that process, whether she sticks with it when it gets hard and uncomfortable, that remains to be seen. But I learned a long time ago that you can't build anything worthwhile without hope, and I have to hope that she'll find her way." "And if she doesn't? If she falls back into old patterns?" His smile was sad but determined. "Then I'll know I gave her every opportunity to succeed. Sometimes that's all we can do. Offer the chance and let people decide whether they're brave enough to take it." We returned to the gala together, slipping back into the celebration of potential and promise. I found myself thinking about Savannah's journey, about how far she had fallen and how far she had yet to climb. The road ahead of her would not be easy. Working minimum wage jobs when you have been planning a life of luxury, facing coworkers who might recognize you from the news coverage of your humiliating public scandal, attending therapy sessions where you had to confront ugly truths about yourself. These were not small challenges, but maybe that was exactly what she needed. Not another shortcut to success, not another borrowed identity to hide behind, but the hard, unglamorous work of building something real. Over the following weeks, I watched Savannah show up at the Collins Foundation office every morning at 8 o'clock sharp. She filed paperwork without complaint, answered phones with patience, made coffee runs for colleagues who had no idea she was the boss's granddaughter. Some days I saw the frustration on her face, the exhaustion, the temptation to quit and find something easier. But she kept showing up. Sunday dinners became a ritual again. At first, they were awkward, filled with careful conversation and topics we all agreed were safe. But gradually, slowly, we began to remember how to be comfortable with each other. Savannah told us about her therapy sessions, about the difficult work of understanding why she had been so desperate for external validation. Grandpa Bill shared stories from the early days of his business, lessons he had learned about resilience and integrity. I talked about my own work, my own dreams, and found myself appreciating these simple family moments in ways I never had before. One Sunday, about 6 months after that meeting in the rooftop garden, Savannah arrived at dinner with a portfolio of her own. She had been working on a proposal for the Collins Foundation, a new scholarship program specifically designed for students from families where entrepreneurship and self-made success were the norm, where the parents had built businesses from nothing and wanted their children to understand that legacy. "I know it might seem self-serving," she said hesitantly as she spread the documents across Grandpa's dining table, "but I've been working with some of the scholarship recipients, and I keep meeting these kids who are ashamed of their parents' work. Kids whose mothers clean houses or whose fathers drive trucks, and they see that as something to escape from rather than to honor. I thought maybe we could create a program that celebrates working-class success, that teaches these kids to be proud of where they come from." Grandpa Bill read through the proposal carefully, his expression neutral. When he finished, he looked up at Savannah with something that might have been pride. "This is good work. Really good. The budget is realistic, the goals are clear, and the mission aligns with what this foundation stands for." Savannah's face lit up. "So you'll consider it?" "I'll do better than consider it. I'll fund it, and I'll put you in charge of running it." "What?" She looked stunned. "But I'm just an administrative assistant. I've only been here 6 months. And in those 6 months, you've proven something important. You've proven you can show up, do the work, and think beyond yourself. This program isn't about making you look good. It's about helping kids who are struggling with the same demons you struggled with. That kind of empathy, that kind of mission-driven thinking, that's what leadership looks like." I saw tears spring to Savannah's eyes, but she blinked them back. "I won't let you down." "I know," he said simply, "because if you were going to let me down, you would have done it already. You would have quit when the work got hard, or when your friends from your old life stopped calling, or when you realized that rebuilding trust takes years, not months. But you didn't quit. You kept showing up. That tells me everything I need to know." It was a turning point, not the end of Savannah's journey, but a marker of significant progress. She threw herself into the new scholarship program with the same intensity she had once devoted to wedding planning, but now it was channeled toward something meaningful, something that would outlast any single event or celebration. As the program took shape over the following year, I watched my sister transform. Not into someone entirely new, but into a more authentic version of who she had always been meant to be. She still had moments of insecurity, still struggled sometimes with the voices in her head that told her she was not good enough. But now she had tools to fight back against those voices, and more importantly, she had a purpose that transcended social status or external validation. The program launched with a gala of its own, but this one was different from that disastrous wedding. The venue was still the Collins Grand Hotel, because Grandpa Bill believed in the power of reclaiming spaces where you had failed. But the guest list included the scholarship recipients and their families, working-class parents who had built small businesses or trades, young people who were learning to be proud of their heritage rather than ashamed of it. Savannah gave a speech that night, and I will never forget her opening words. "My name is Savannah Sterling, and my grandfather built this hotel with money he earned from construction work. For a long time, I was ashamed of that fact. I thought it made me less than the people born into wealth and privilege. It took losing everything I thought I wanted to realize that my grandfather's story, his journey from nothing to something, that is the greatest privilege I could ever have inherited." The room erupted in applause, and I saw Grandpa Bill wipe away tears he did not bother to hide. This was the granddaughter he had always believed she could be, if only she could find the courage to be herself. After the gala, the three of us found ourselves back in that rooftop garden where Savannah had asked for a second chance. The city spread out below us, millions of lights representing millions of stories, everyone fighting their own battles, building their own legacies. "I was thinking," Savannah said, looking out at the skyline, "about Preston Montgomery, about whether he ever thinks about me, about us, about what happened." "Does it matter?" I asked gently. She considered this. "No, I guess it doesn't. I used to think I needed his approval, his family's acceptance, to validate my existence. But I've learned that the only validation that matters comes from living according to your values. Preston and his family, they're still playing the same games, still measuring worth by bloodlines and bank accounts. I don't envy them anymore. I pity them." "That's growth," Grandpa Bill observed. "Real, meaningful growth, moving from resentment to indifference to compassion. That's the work of healing." "I still have bad days," Savannah admitted. "Days when I see pictures on social media of people from my old life, living in those beautiful houses, attending those exclusive events. And for a moment, I feel that old pull, that desire to be part of that world again." "That's normal," Grandpa Bill said. "Temptation doesn't disappear just because you've done the work of changing. But what matters is what you do with that temptation." "I remind myself what it cost me," Savannah said. "What I had to lose to finally find myself. And then I get back to work, focus on the scholarship program, on the kids who need someone to tell them their stories matter." We stood there in comfortable silence, three people who had walked through fire together and emerged scarred but stronger. The Collins Grand Hotel stood beneath us, a symbol of what could be built through determination and integrity. But the real monument was not made of steel and glass. It was made of second chances and hard-won wisdom, of failures transformed into lessons, of broken relationships painstakingly repaired. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Grandpa Bill said eventually, looking at both Savannah and me. "It's not the business I built or the money I made or even this hotel. It's that when everything fell apart, when we were tested in the worst way possible, we found our way back to each other. That's the real legacy. Not what you build, but who you become in the process of building it." Savannah reached out and took his hand, and I took her other hand, and we stood there linked together under the Boston sky. We were not perfect. Our family was still healing, still learning, still working through the damage that had been done. But we were together, and we were trying. And sometimes, that is all that really matters.